Good morning. Well, if you had the opportunity and read through 1 Samuel this week, then Here I Raise My Ebenezer would not have caught you off guard in the song this morning. If you did not, you might have thought we were singing about Scrooge. So I would encourage you, go back and read 1 Samuel. As you can see, if you're a guest with us this morning, we've been going through God's story in the Old Testament, the story before Jesus, and so we've been reading through 1 Samuel this week. If you have a request for prayer, it is our custom at the end of the lesson, you can meet with a couple of our elders and their wives. They will be in the conference room, which is out the back door down to the left. They would love to meet with you and pray with you about any concern that you have. Let's go to God now in prayer as we begin our lesson this morning. Father, as we reflect upon your Scripture this morning, we ask that you would help us to grasp in an even greater way who it is that we are dealing with, in whose presence we have come. Ask that you be with us and help us to understand in the preaching and the hearing of your word. It's through your Son we pray. Amen. About 2 weeks ago in Rio de Janeiro, there was a young woman by the name of Pauliana Viana who was waiting on the roadside for an Uber to come pick her up, and a man approached her and asked her if she had the time. And she told him what time it was. And then he said, "Give me your phone and don't try anything. I'm armed." She said this later about her encounter. "He was really close to me. So I thought, if it's a gun, he won't have time to draw it. So I stood up. I threw 2 punches and a kick." What he didn't know is he had encountered an MMA fighter. "He fell, then I caught him in a rear naked choke. Then I sat him down in the same place we were before and said, 'Now we'll wait for the police.'" Well, here's a picture of Pauliana. And here's a picture of the fella after she was done with him. So I think this is a case of a guy not knowing who he was dealing with before he got to her. You might have noticed that in your reading of 1 Samuel this week, Israel often finds themselves in this same situation. They really don't understand who it is that they're dealing with. So we've been reading 1 Samuel this week, but you might recall it's really still the same period as the Judges. And we remember how bad things were with the Judges. In fact, the book of Judges ends this way. In those days, Israel had no king. Everyone did as they saw fit. And this continues really in the book of 1 Samuel. We read about this guy Eli, who is a priest, who has 2 good-for-nothing sons who are really bad people who do as they see fit. It's the kind of kids you wouldn't want yours playing with out on the playground. They cheat people. They intimidate people. They're sleeping with the women that are serving at the tabernacle, so they're not good people. And one of the things we remember about the book of Judges and that whole era is that the people of Israel were not obeying God, they were not teaching their children who God was, and that they worshipped other idols alongside of Yahweh. They were treating Yahweh as if He was just one of the many gods that were available to them in the land. And so in the land. So all of that is still going on by the time we get to 1 Samuel. A lot of idolatry. And idolatry really is just an attempt to manipulate the gods to do your bidding. So the thought was different gods controlled different things. Baal was thought to be this fertility god. Yam was the god of the sea and the rivers, all the waterways. And Mot was the god of the underworld. And Yahweh was thought of by the Canaanites and also by the Israelites, because they had sort of been influenced by the Canaanites. God, Yahweh, was thought of as this God of war. So what you would do is you would appeal to whichever God for whatever need you have. If you're planting crops, then you're going to appeal to Baal. You're going to make offerings to Baal. You're going to pray to Baal. If you're planning on traveling on the water, then you're going to appeal to Yam and make offerings to Yam and pray to Yam. And if you're going to war, well then of course you're going to call on Yahweh to help you in a particular battle. And if praying doesn't work, then you try something else. Maybe you make an offering, or there's all kinds of alternatives. There's this great story. When we get further on in our reading of the Old Testament this year, there's this great story of the prophet Elijah who has this encounter with the prophets of Baal on Mount Carmel. And he challenges them sort of to this duel. And he says, you call on your God and I'll call on mine, and we'll see who's going to answer. And so they put out this offering. They have this altar with this wood on it and this meat on it. And they start calling on Baal to send down fire, lightning to come down and consume it. And nothing happens. And the next thing they start doing is they pull out these swords and they start cutting themselves because there's something they feel like they have to do to manipulate or encourage or grease the skids with this God for him to do something for them. And that's really what you're trying to do in all this, is you're trying to grease the skids with the God. Make things work out easier so that God will do what you want him to do. In certain cities, if you're trying to get some building plans through and they're not really copacetic, you might be able to grease the skids maybe a couple $100 with your application to city engineer, and maybe you'll get it to go through a little bit easier. I have it on good authority that those feeble attempts will not work in Nacogdoches, just so you know. But that's what you're trying to do. You're trying to grease the skids with the person. And that's what the pagans were trying to do with their gods. And so maybe they would offer an incantation to the god, or maybe a sacrifice, or maybe cut yourself, but do something to try to get the god to do what you wanted. So idolatry is really nothing more than manipulation or an attempt at a bribe with the god. So in 1 Samuel, we see this with Israel. They take this approach with Yahweh. We start in chapter 4. Now the Israelites went out to fight against the Philistines. The Israelites camped at Ebenezer, and the Philistines at Aphek. The Philistines deployed their forces to meet Israel, and as the battle spread, Israel was defeated by the Philistines, who killed about 4,000 of them on the battlefield. When the soldiers returned to camp, the elders of Israel asked, "Why did the Lord bring defeat on us today before the Philistines? Let us bring the ark of the Lord's covenant from Shiloh, so that he may go with us and save us from the hand of our enemies." So the people sent men to Shiloh, and they brought back the ark of the covenant of the Lord Almighty, who is enthroned between the cherubim. And Eli's 2 sons, Hophni and Phinehas, were there with the ark of the covenant of God. When the ark of the Lord's covenant came into the camp, all Israel raised such a great shout that the ground shook. Hearing the uproar, the Philistines asked, "What's all this shouting in the Hebrew camp?" When they learned that the ark of the Lord had come into the camp, the Philistines were afraid. "A god has come into the camp," they said. "Oh no, nothing like this has ever happened before. We're doomed. Who will deliver us from the hand of these mighty gods? They are the gods who struck the Egyptians with all kinds of plagues in the wilderness. Be strong, Philistines. Be men, or you will be subject to the Hebrews as they have been to you. Be men and fight." So the Philistines fought, and the Israelites were defeated, and every man fled to his tent. So the Israelites go into battle against the Philistines, and they get beat like Baylor. I mean, it's bad. Apparently, Samson had not done a good enough job of dispatching with these Philistines, and so now they're having trouble with them again. And they've gone and they've lost this battle. Why did they lose? Is it because the Philistines have chariots? Is it because they are more mighty warriors? Is it because there are more of them? Is it because the Israelites are just wimps? Someone said, "You know what I think the real problem is? The real problem is we didn't bring the box." The box? What do you mean? Well, the box that has God in it, you know. "Oh, you mean the Ark of the Covenant?" Yes, we didn't bring the box that has the 10 Commandments and the manna and Aaron's staff in it. We didn't bring it out here to battle. Somebody go and get the box. And so they go to Shiloh and they get God in the box. And surely we will win now that we have God in the box. Before we forgot about God, but now we have remembered him. We've brought him out here to the battle. So surely we will be victorious now. Except, of course, they weren't. Do you have one of those children in your family who will not cooperate? Probably all of us do, right? It's the kid that in the living room does something really funny, dances a jig or whatever. You just find it really enjoyable to watch. And so friends or neighbors come over and you tell the child, okay, do that. And you know what the child does? Right? They will not perform when you want them to perform, right? And they're going to perform when you don't want them to perform. Well, that's really how the Lord is in this story. Israel is expecting God to perform, to do what they wanted, because they brought the ark out, and now God is supposed to jump when they say jump. But God refuses to perform when they want him to perform. And then he does perform when some others don't want him to perform. So the Philistines win the battle. They take the ark. The story goes on in 1 Samuel 4. They take the ark back home with them, and they put it in the temple with their god Dagon. And then they wake up the next morning, and Dagon has fallen over on his face. Well, this isn't good. So they stand Dagon back up, and the next morning, same thing. But now his head and his arms have broken off. It has to be disconcerting when your God loses his head. And so they're very concerned with all of this. And then tumors start breaking out on people, and they become infested with all these rats. Rats running around in your cabinets and rats running around through the living room, and nobody wants all of this. And all of a sudden the Ark of the Covenant, the box, becomes a hot potato. Here, you take it over in Gath. No, you have it over in Ekron, and they're moving it around. We don't want it. You take it. Don't bring it to us. And they finally figure out this way of dealing with it and sending the ark, sending the box back to the Israelites. The Israelites and the Philistines and Pollyanna's would-be robber all have something in common. They've all underestimated who it is that they are dealing with. The Israelites think that Yahweh is a God who can be manipulated, like Baal or Yam or Mot. And they don't realize they've gotten a tiger by the tail. They don't realize that God is not a button on their vending machine. But that's often how God is treated. And not just by the Israelites. Some years ago, those of you who are old enough to remember this, Burt Reynolds produced a movie and starred in a movie titled The End. And in that movie, he was an unscrupulous real estate man who found out that he had a blood disease in which he was going to die, and he was going to die a painful death, so he had decided to take his life, but he was not very good at it. And he ends up out in the ocean, and when he's out there, he finally realizes he doesn't want to die, he wants to live, but he can see land, but it's a long way away, and he tries to swim for it, but he's not sure that he's going to make it, and so he begins to pray, and the prayers go like this: "Save me, Lord, and I swear I'll be a better father, I'll be a better man, I'll be a better everything. Let me live, and I promise to obey every one of the 10 commandments." And then he says, "Let me live, and I promise to learn every one of the 10 commandments. Just get me to the beach, and I promise not to sell lakeside lots unless there's a lake around. Help me make it. I'll give you 50% of everything I make. I'm talking gross, God." And then all of a sudden he notices, the land is getting a little bit nearer. He's getting nearer to the beach now. And so he says, "No more cheating in business. Once I get rid of those 9 acres in the desert, no more cheating in business. And I'm going to start donating that 10% right away." And of course, as he gets closer and closer to the land, then all the things he had decided he was going to do, maybe he's not going to do so much anymore. God sort of becomes a G button like that, the button on the vending machine. Normally I push the M button, which stands for me, when I want something from the vending machine, what I want it to produce in my life. But sometimes the M button, the me button, doesn't work so well, so I go to the G button, and I want the G button to produce. I'm wanting God to produce in my life and do something for me. One way, of course, is the Burt Reynolds approach. I'm going to start negotiating with God. I'm going to start bargaining with God. It's the modern version of cutting yourself, like Elijah had to deal with. "God, if you'll do this for me, I'll do that for you," as if we can somehow manipulate and work God to do our bidding. Another way is prayer. I'm not normally a person who prays, but I've gotten bad test results, and so now I'm going to start praying a lot. And God is now supposed to intervene and help me out. I'm going to get the box out. I'm going to bring the box out to deal with my situation here. I normally keep the box over there, but now I'm going to bring it out. Of course, the old standby is church. I'm going to start going to church so I can sort of grease the skids for God to do something in my life and help me out. Or I'm going to keep going to church, and if I do that enough, maybe God's going to let me into heaven when I die. The reality is we're just treating God as the G button. I want what I want, and then I want God to perform. I've tried the M button, but the M button's not working on this thing, so let me now go ahead and try the G button and see if I can get God to work. And so it's an attempt for us to just go get the ark and now bring the ark when we need God to deal with something in our lives. Who do we think God is? Is he like some businessman in town and we're trying to bargain with him on how things work, on how much we're willing to pay? Or is he some kind of corrupt judge that we can just slip him a little bit of extra and now he's going to work things out for us? Or is he just that doting grandmother that if we just smile, he's going to do anything for us? This story reminds us, God is God and I am not. Which we sort of know, but at the same time, maybe don't quite realize. I think about from the moment I wake up, and you as well, the moment you wake up in the morning, really it's kind of all about you, and you think about what you're going to do in the day, what you're going to buy, where you're going to go, what you're going to eat, what you're going to read, all these sorts of things as you go. And people are going to move in and out of your life all throughout the day. Your coworkers, the checker at Walmart, the guy at the stoplight whose music is just way too loud. People are just kind of rotating in and out your life. But they're really kind of orbiting around you, right? They're kind of orbiting around me. It's my story and everybody else is in it. Now, honestly, none of us would really say that because that's kind of narcissistic to think like that, isn't it? But we just sort of assume it. It's my world and you're playing in it. And God's playing his role in it as well. And when I need him, I'll push the G button and he'll come. Of course, until he doesn't. Until he won't perform when we want him to perform. And that happens because God is God and I am not. So a great way to learn this lesson is worship. Worship has this way, if at least we will allow it, worship has this way of reorienting us as to who's in charge. Worship has this way of reorienting us as to who's orbiting who. A reminder that it is God's world and God's story, and we are just playing our role in it. So I bring you back to the psalm that was read this morning. The Lord reigns. Let the earth be glad. Let the distant shores rejoice. Clouds and thick darkness surround him. Righteousness and justice are the foundation of his throne. Fire goes before him and consumes his foes on every side. Cloud, thick darkness, fire, lightning. God is dangerous and God is awesome. And we sang songs this morning that would bring us back, that would help to reorient us. The splendor of the King, robed in majesty. When I in awesome wonder consider all the worlds thy hands have made. Worship has this way, again, if we will allow it, to remind us that God is not playing a part in our story. We're playing a part in God's story. And there is no G button. And if we would take the time during the week, we can discover this same thing in our prayer lives. Have you ever, well, maybe I shouldn't say have you ever, how often have you caught yourself in prayer saying inane things or just repetitive things just because that's the sort of thing you're supposed to say in prayer? This week I was praying, I had the prayer guide out in the bulletin, and it was, I don't remember what day it was, but I was praying for the people on that day involved in my prayer, and I'm thinking about these people and their needs, and all of a sudden I found myself saying, thank you. Well, thank you is a nice platitude. It's that sort of thing you're supposed to say in prayer, except it really wasn't appropriate for what I was doing. I should have been saying please instead of thank you, but I sort of gotten distracted and went through this motion of these things that I say in prayer. And maybe you find yourself doing the same sort of thing. And I find that in my own life, and you may find it as well, that it's like I'm handling dynamite, but I'm acting like I have just a collection of Lincoln logs in my hand that I don't really understand. Like Pollyanna's would-be robber doesn't really understand who he's dealing with. I don't really understand who it is that I'm dealing with here. I'm sort of as clueless as the Philistines who have brought the ark over into their cities. But I find that if I keep praying, and I can get past the platitudes, that I might realize, that I might find some reorientation. That it's God's story, and I'm playing a role. That it's me who orbits around God. There's another thing that happens, and it happens for Israel. Another thing that happens that will help to reorient us. When the Israelites brought out the ark, they still lost the battle. But losing the battle is sometimes a really good opportunity for reorientation. It was an opportunity for them to realize, oh yeah, God doesn't orbit us, we orbit God. Oh yeah, God's not playing a part in our story, we're playing a part in His story. Difficult things come in life. They do. We lose battles. And when we lose battles, we might be tempted to try to push the G button. See if I can get God to work in the way I want Him to work in this situation. But if you resist that temptation, you might find something even greater. There's an opportunity in that moment, an opportunity for reorientation in that moment, an opportunity to change the orbit, the opportunity to see God as God. And you may not end up getting the thing you want, but you'll end up getting the thing you really need. So when that time comes, when you lose that battle, when you lose whatever, will you take that opportunity? Let's stand and sing.